Okay, I just want to thank those of you who've joined early. We're still holding on for a few minutes because we don't have quorum yet. And meeting time is not officially started. I did want to let folks know that I am sick right now, so I apologize if I have to mute myself periodically. Thank you.
Too much turkey on Thursday, Michelle. Oh, you're such a trooper showing up sick and all. Poor thing.
Yeah. Thanks for being here.
Yeah. Well, I want everybody to know the County of Maui offices are in the full swing of Christmas spirit. It's probably 30 degrees in here today. It's freezing.
Oh my gosh.
It's crazy.
No wonder you're all bundled up. It looks like you've got a turtleneck on too.
I do. And I should have brought a jacket. It's crazy that's that cold over here today.
It's like you've encountered a real winter.
Yes, I know. I only wear this turtleneck when I travel on the East Coast because it's so cold. It's one of the 30 things I wear under my jacket, you know, but I pulled it out today. I thought, okay, it's been chilly at work. I can't believe how cold it is.
I'm going to New Zealand after Christmas, and the lows will be in the around 60.
Where are you going?
Auckland, North Island.
Oh, nice.
Did you know I live there?
No, I did not. So
yes,
maybe
I
we
lived
need
there
to.
for 6 years. My daughter was born there. She has dual citizenship.
Wow, lucky her.
She can escape if she has to. You'll love it. This is a great time to go to New Zealand.
Apparently, it's the start of their summer.
It is.
Christmas. So
yep.
yeah.
I figured out after living there a while why they report their sunshine in annual hours and not days. It rains all the time.
That's why it's so green.
It's green. It's beautiful. You'll love it. You will love it. I guarantee you. By the way, the nickname for cannabis in New Zealand is DAC.
How you spell that?
Where does that come
D-A-K.
from?
I have no idea. It's just that's what the popular terminology is in New Zealand. DAC, D-A-K. Don't know why.
Okay, I see Garrett and I see Isaac. Hi, Isaac. I see you have your hand raised. Did you have a question? Or okay. So actually, with Isaac and Garrett joining, we do have quorum. And it is 12:01. We've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to go ahead and call this last meeting of the dual use of cannabis task force to order.
For those members of the public who are watching the meeting on Zoom or listening by phone, we have 3 substantive agenda items today. The first substantive agenda item is a task force discussion and decision making on language for the task force social equity recommendations to include in the final task force report. The second substantive agenda item is a task force discussion and decision making on additional recommendations to include in the task force report. And the third substantive agenda item is task force member approval for the final draft of the report of the state legislature. As with previous task force meetings, as testifiers, you will have 2 minutes to provide your testimony on the agenda items. I'll give you a 30-second warning. We'll call time at 2 minutes to provide everyone the opportunity to speak, allowing adequate time for the task force members to work through the agenda items. Testifiers, all testimony will only be heard before each agenda item. Even though today the task force is meeting remotely, we still entertain in-person testimony and online testifiers, and then phone testify. So let's turn to agenda item 2, a task force discussion and decision-making on language for the task force social equity recommendations to include in the final task force report. I have Jason Hanley here in person who would like to testify. And Mr. Hanley, if your testimony relates to multiple agenda items, please limit your testimony just the agenda. We take the testimony on at a time. And that is agenda item 2, task force discussion and decision making on the language for the task force special equity recommendations to include in the final task force report. Mr. Hanley.
Okay, can you hear me? Good morning, task force group members. This is our last one. Here we go. So my name is Jason Hanley. I'm the president of the Oahu Cannabis Farm Alliance. We support moving forward with medical regulation before recreational and a solid medical program. As we wrap up this task force group, provide recommendations for legislation moving forward, we've not addressed the most important issue. How will Hawaii move forward and come up with legislation that will benefit the cannabis and medical patient? It is obvious that most people in Hawaii do not understand the benefits of cannabis and how this plant provides ethnobotanical solutions for adults and children fighting things such as pain management, cancer, and a list of other problems. I myself have thousands of testimonies on how this plant has saved people's lives. A medical cannabis program must be developed rapidly to help these people. Our current program is only a Band-Aid and still does not provide access to over 75% of the medical card holders in Hawaii. What is the problem? Cost of medicine, access to medicine, without having to go into a brick and mortar store that only caters to a person who can afford the overinflated medicine. These problems are dispensaries are overregulated and only by a few people and are unsustainable for our demography. People are hurting and struggling every day, but yet the state does not take this serious and instead chooses to focus on an outdated concept that marijuana will ruin our children and communities. This is just not the case. It can be backed up with extensive data collected over the last 20 years from states that have been successful. The state of Maine has proven what a medical program does for its local people, but stood up
In 30 seconds, Mr. Hanley, please.
but not standing up a medical program before moving on to recreational program with regulations for patients to grow their own medicine, open their own retail stores, and cultivation laws that make sense for medical farms. The data is there and has largely been ignored. The pathway of medical cannabis regulation is to empower the patient and the small craft cannabis industry, and that has kept large cannabis operators out of their states.
And that's time for you, Mr. Hanley. Thank you, sir.
Please help the people of Hawaii.
Task force members, questions for Mr. Hanley? I'm seeing none. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We're now ready to take testifiers online. And I would ask that you limit yourself to this agenda item. When I call your name, you'll be asked to unmute. Please go ahead and unmute yourself if you feel comfortable on your camera. The first ready to hear from, the only name I've been given is the first name, which is Sherry. Sherry, we're ready to take your testimony. No connection yet with Sherry? Okay, we'll move to Mr. James Anthony, and then we'll come back to Sherry after Mr. Anthony's done. Mr. Anthony? All right, I understand Mr. Anthony's connected. Mr. Anthony, you ready to testify?
Yes, I am. As usual, I'm speaking on behalf of the Hawaii Cannabis Hui, which has convened stakeholders for over 2 going on 3 years now, discussing issues related to legalization, or more accurately, the commercialization of cannabis within the context of social equity and different market structures. Again, the Hui is grateful for the work done by the Social Equity Working Group It certainly does a good job of documenting the history of oops, let me adjust my camera angle slightly, of disparate impact on socioeconomic and different ethnic groups in Hawaii, particularly Native Hawaiians. The question is what to do about this, because there are no solid models of either impacting and undercutting the underground market, really in any of the other states you've looked at closely, certainly not California. Nor do these so-called social equity programs with their Band-Aid approach to a dysfunctional market system, overregulated and overtaxed, in any way address the serious social justice issues. So as we said in our written testimony, I would emphasize three things. One is that decriminalization is absolutely imperative. It is astonishing that we are talking about commercializing cannabis and we are still arresting people and putting people in prison, predominantly Native Hawaiians and other Polynesians. Secondly, we appreciate you slowing down the conversation and taking a look at what's happening in other parts of the country. And any one of your recommendations, putting it to the legislature, starting another working group, another task force, all of that makes sense. So I'm sure you're going to sort that out. And finally, consider how markets structures impact social equity. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, sir. Task force members, questions for Mr. Anthony?
Thank you, Mr. Anthony, for your testimony. And I do see that we're considering another working group to specifically address the social equity issue. And I ask you again regarding decriminalization or legalization, what threshold should the legislature recommend, in your opinion, next session for no law enforcement action whatsoever for a person who possesses cannabis?
Right. Well, that's a really interesting question. And there are two basic approaches. One is to have a bright line sort of numerical limit per person. And the best example of that currently is not only what's recommended in the Social Equity Working Group report, which I think was actually 20 plants and the cannabis derived therefrom, or the current medical limits, which are 10 plants per patient and the cannabis derived therefrom, or 4 ounces, whichever is greater. That sort of approach is very simple. You could simply match the existing medical limits for all adults over 21. The other approach, which is very interesting and actually makes a lot of sense, was actually taken in Colorado at this last election related to some specific sacred healing plant medicines, iboga, DMT, mescaline, and psilocybin and psilocin derived from mushrooms. In that case, while they set up a regulatory system for healthcare professionals, they also allowed for personal and community use for sacramental purposes, for wellness, and for personal development and transformation. In that case, they did not specify hard numerical limits. What they specified was the amount necessary for those specific purposes. So for personal and community use, for personal wellness, transformation, spiritual development, those kinds of experiences, whatever amount was necessary for that individual or that community, assuming that people were partaking in these sacramental plants in some kind of a group setting, that would be the amount that would be allowed. And that makes sense. Whatever is necessary, whatever is reasonable. So I think that is a policy decision really for the legislature, although you could make an approach to that. I would also emphasize that because of the good work done by the Social Equity Working Group, it is clear the disparate impact on Native Hawaiians, and that therefore any bill related to decriminalization or legalization or any kind of modification to the medical policy that all of these bills must go to the Hawaiian Affairs Committees in both houses. And I would respectfully request that the task force add that specific recommendation. This is a matter of concern to Native Hawaiians. Legalization, dual use must be referred to those committees. Thank you so much.
Point taken on including Native Hawaiians in the deliberations. My concern with the committee process is that if something gets quadruple referred, then it's likely just going to die, due to time constraints. But thank you again for clarifying. I think that it's very important in the next year that the legislature weigh in and decriminalize at least 1 ounce and up to 4 ounces in, for somebody who might have some in their car or on their person, because the objective is to actually remove low-level enforcement activities entirely from law enforcement. So mahalo for your testimony.
Fair enough. I just say that quadruple referrals usually result in 2 joint hearings. You could do health and Hawaiian affairs together, something like that.
Any other questions for Mr. Anthony before we move on?
Yes, Judge, I have a question for Mr. Anthony. Mr. Anthony, you said that you would allow up to 20 plants per person for personal use. Isn't that more than the consumption or more than a single person can consume? Well,
the consumption and use of cannabis plants, Director Choi, varies wildly from individual to individual, depending on whether they're just merely, using it as something that they're smoking or inhaling in some fashion, vaporizing as a dried flower, or if they're processing it in some way.
Mr. Anthony, 20 plants, the volume of 20 plants is a lot, right? It's a lot.
20 plants seems quite reasonable to me, and it was what's in your working group report. What we used to use, based on expert testimony for medical in California and Oakland in particular, was indoor gardens of 200 square feet. So those would be 4 light grows.
But that's for one person's consumption, right, Mr. Anthony? That's for one person's consumption.
Correct. That was the testimony of Chris Conrad, who was a qualified expert in many cases.
So if you had excess, what would that person do with the excess marijuana?
Well, so first of all, farming is a tricky business, Director Choi. So we should be so lucky that our legal medical cannabis supply was in excess. And that can be shared with other adults or possibly moved into the commercial system after testing. There are many ways to solve that problem. It's a good problem to have. We can only help.
So you would, as far as expungement of people's record in possession of marijuana, are you submitting that if they sold their excess, their records should also be expunged?
Considering that you and this task force and the legislature are now contemplating manifesting a multi-billion-dollar industry for doing exactly that, right? That's what we're talking about when we're talking about social injustice, is that people are sitting in prison right now for doing that, for monetizing their excess, which is exactly what we're talking about. So in the interest of justice, that should be retroactively applied. Correct.
Okay. So I just want to get that clear. So selling marijuana, your record should be expunged if you're selling marijuana. That's fine. I just want to get that clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Choi. Task force members, any other questions from Mr. Anthony before we move on? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Anthony.
Thank you all for your service.
Thank you. The next testifier has just indicated their first name, which is Robert. We'll try to connect with Robert now. All right, I understand we're connected with Robert. Robert, I'm going to ask you to proceed with your testimony.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, sir. Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate this task force. I know that a lot of the task force members don't really have experience with this plant, and it's learning how
Robert, we can no longer hear
different
you.
plans. Sorry, I have a bad Zoom connection.
Yeah, you're
Might-
breaking up.
I might be better off. I might be better off with a telephone call.
Okay.
I'll try to call back with a,
Okay, all right, fine. We'll take phone testimony in just a minute. We're gonna try to connect with Sherry again. Sherry was the first person whose name I called, but we couldn't connect with her at the time. Still no connection with Sherry. All right, we have one more test. Oh, Sherry, okay, Sherry, I understand we're connected with you. We're ready to hear from you.
I'm sorry, was unaware that I was going to be speaking today. And I was not prepared to say anything other than to address, the schedule, how the scheduled one, and you cannot, I'm just not prepared. I'm sorry. I'm just
All right.
listening to what you all have to say.
That's fine, that's fine. The next testifier is Micah, is it Ina? Micah Ina, all right, we'll see if we can connect with Mr. Ina.
Hi, thank you. Can you folks hear me okay?
We can hear you clearly, sir. Yes, please proceed.
Awesome. I just wanted to, coming from a software perspective, I work for a point of sale company in the cannabis space. And I do want to make everyone here aware that, we are in a BioTrack. We're requiring retailers to use BioTrack. From a software perspective, BioTrack is only used in about 5% of the states that have adult use programs. It's very limiting. So when we're talking about, consumption limits per day, number of times they can visit per day, these things I think I've seen through, what New York, New Jersey is going through. I've grown with these newer states, and I've seen where their limits are due to the BioTrack or the metric seed to sale system. So as we consider our move towards adult use, or whatever the next step be it, I think the use of metric as a seed to sale system would open up a lot more. It'd make it a lot easier on the regulators to be able to control things like purchasing limits and that stuff.
Thank you, Mr. Ina. Any questions for Mr. Ina, task force member?
Quick question for Mr. Ina. Given there's been a general recognition that vertical integration is problematic, even under our existing medical cannabis system, what would the impact of maintaining a seed to sale biotracking have on a prospective adult use market, particularly the participation of growers and distributors and retailers and delivery services how has it operated in adult use markets and in comparison to others that don't use that kind of biotracking system?
Great question. So take, for instance, we have other states like Pennsylvania would be one. There are a few other states like New Mexico, Arizona might be looking at using BioTrack. BioTrack is owned or recently got purchased by a pharmaceutical company. BioTrack simply makes it really hard for other third-party software companies to integrate with them. So, I mean, just from the stance of giving the licensees the proper tools to be able to operate to your regulations, BioTrack is an extremely old software that no longer accepts integration from outside vendors. And places like New York will run into this problem. Existing places that use BioTrack have run into it already, where it makes it extremely hard to track it. I'm a third party. Indica Online, feel free to look at it or, contact me directly. I could take you through some of the use cases of this. But with Metric, it's just big players like Weed Maps, medium players like myself, Indica Online, Dutchy. There are all these software tools that, in my opinion, make it a lot easier for regulators to have the transparency that's needed. So I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Heiner? I'm hearing none. Thank you. Robert, is Robert virtual or by phone? All right. That takes care of virtual testimonies. We're going to move to our telephone testimonies. Please press *9 to raise your hand. And when prompted or asked, please press 6 to unmute yourself. Is Robert ready to go? Does it look like? All right, Robert, we have you by phone.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, sir. Please speak a little louder. Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Sorry about this technical difficulties.
Yes.
I am a severely disabled patient. Called and been in a few of these meetings for testimony. I need this medication, the medical cannabis, to save my life. And this federal rule has passed the medical marijuana research and cannabinoid expansion. Cannot talk so good because of my disability, but that and the FDA, I believe a good social equity inclusion would be for the School of Medicine and CTAR, perhaps through GoFarm, to work with severely disabled patients and other equity applicants to help do the market of the federal research cannabis. And that way we would be in legal federal level. As a disabled commercial farmer, federal, same with the doctors, there's a lot of federal programs.
You have 30 seconds, Robert. I'm going to ask you to wrap it up, please.
That is already passed the state, passed the U.S. Senate and the Congress, and it's been signed, or it's going to be signed by Biden. So Senator Schatz worked on that bill, and that could allow us to grow federally legal, and I think that should be a avenue for the social equity to include severely disabled
Thank you.
as growing is therapeutic model.
I'm very pleased we're able to eventually hear from you. Task force members, any questions for Robert? I'm hearing none. Madam Chair, we're now ready to take up agenda item 2, a task force discussion and decision-making on language for the task force social equity recommendation, including the final task force report. Madam Chair, I turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you. So just as just a couple of reminders. As we've said, this is the last task force meeting, and the dual use of cannabis task force will be closed at the end of this meeting. A reminder to task force members that we must have a quorum, which is 8 yes, or with reservation votes for a motion to be adopted. So the first for under agenda item 2, which is task force discussion and decision making on the language for task force social equity recommendations to be included in the final report. What happened was at our last meeting on November 14th, I had voiced my concerns that the task force had not had adequate time to fully investigate the subject of social equity, and I had proposed that in lieu of voting to adopt the recommendations of the social equity working group, that we instead make a recommendation to establish a separate task force to investigate social equity for cannabis. So this recommendation was adopted. And since then, I have received we have received 3 suggested wordings to be inserted into the final report as task force final recommendations related to social equity. I am trying to, sorry, I want it, rather than having to read them all out loud, I'm gonna pull the language up. It should all be in your, it should be in your, the agenda. There we go. Can you guys confirm that you can see the language? Okay, awesome. Thanks for the thumbs up. Okay, so there were 3 separate wordings that were recommended. The first was my proposal. The second was from Mr. Member Garrett Halladyer, and then the last one was from Member Terry Gorman. So before we actually have a vote, I wanted to invite any task force members to make any comments or recommendations. You know, we don't have to adopt any one of these requirements verbatim. So happy to, the reason why I have it pulled up is I'm happy to wordsmith
Chair,
recommendation.
Chair,
So please go ahead.
this is Member Ellen Ching.
Yes.
I would like to make a motion to adopt your recommendation with an amendment. The amendment would be combining your recommendation with the recommendations, with elements of the recommendation from Member Terry Gorman. So the amendment would be the legislation. If you could scroll back to your,
Oh, I'm sorry.
okay, thank you. Legislation should establish a properly resourced, legalized cannabis social equity task force to make recommendations for, and it would have A, B, C. And then I would want to add another alphabet, D. The task force shall at a minimum include leaders from OHA and Department of Hawaiian Homelands. So my motion is to adopt your recommendation with those amendments.
Chair, I have a point of order before motion.
Okay, can I just like work on just jotting down Ellen's recommendations, and then I'll circle back to you, Isaac, and I see Garrett and Randy also have their hands raised.
Okay.
Okay, Ellen, can you repeat that the language that you had suggested for item D?
The task force shall at a minimum include leaders from OHA and Department of Hawaiian Homelands.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Isaac.
I'm a little confused. This is just, I have a point of order. Exactly what we're gonna vote on here. Are we gonna go through every single motion, try to wordsmith it, come up with combinations, and then vote on that? And then do we vote on Garrett's suggestion? And then can we vote yes 3 times? Or do we have to pick one out of 3?
Yeah, so my suggestion is that we pick one out of the 3, but but I want to allow for any editing of the language.
Chair, for example, let's say I want to vote for your suggestion without any modifications. Now that you're amending it, do I vote no?
That would be up to you, but what, I mean,
How
we have
would I
to,
do this?
so what I want to do is take first any suggested edits to the documents and then, I mean, to the recommendations. And then I will entertain motions to vote on choosing one of the 3 sets of recommendations. And to be honest, if we cannot come to an agreement on any one of them, then what will be put into the final report is that the task force was unable to come to an agreement on a recommendation with regards to social equity.
Okay, Chair, thank you.
Okay. Garrett, I think I saw your hand up next.
Thank you, Chair. I have fairly grave reservations about putting a request for an additional task force for the social equity as opposed to providing, and is kind of worded in my suggestion, providing all of the information to the legislature to go through their public process during the legislative session. One of the most kind of difficult things in creating a new task force is that it will postpone any social equity component of a cannabis bill for another year or 2. In the meantime, legalization may happen in Hawaii, it may happen at the federal level, and it will place any social equity licensees at that time 3-4 years behind at the very least the creation of any particular market, which puts them at a significant disadvantage to any of the first movers under any legalization bill. So to restrict or to on purpose do that to social equity applicants seems against the core of this. And it is not that the organizations that have been listed in Terry's solution should not be intimately involved in this process, but I believe that they could be intimately involved in this process throughout the legislative process itself. And more importantly, as the social equity report recommends, through the kind of independent regulatory body that both studies, advises, updates, and manages that social equity kind of component of it. I believe that the recommendation was that they have seats on that particular board. And this mirrors a lot of kind of the legislation from other states, for instance, Massachusetts, where they establish a social equity program, but give it to the independent board to figure out exactly who benefits from it, in what ways, and to what extent, rather than having so many of those details orchestrated through the legislative process, giving permission to do those studies over time and to adjust them to the regulatory body instead of doing more studies and having a particular single recommendation from a future task force for the legislature to integrate verbatim. And that's why we do not or should not, as we discussed last time or voted on last time, recommend the social equity report. I also don't think that we should recommend a task force, but should just provide a report as a menu of options, similar to what your recommendation is doing, Chair, but without the requirement of the task force. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Randy, I think you have your hand up. And it looks like we lost Randy.
Can you hear me? I'm still here.
Okay, okay. Sorry.
No worries. I just wanted to provide maybe an easy solution here, maybe some comments. Just to remind everyone, these are just recommendations, right? We're not kind of making any laws. We're just kind of giving a lawmaker something to chew on. So my suggestion would be that we just adopt all 3 of these. I think they're all great. They all have great things in them that suggest some things that lawmakers could touch on. And they can take a look at it if they'd like. I think Garrett's suggestion really at core touches what we wanted to do with the social equity task or the committee. I think Michelle's really lays out those 3 buckets and then offers a possibility of doing a task force if that's what the legislature wants to do. And then Terry's really provides that background of which agencies would be available and should be, given her expertise, through her work with the Native Hawaiian Chamber of Commerce. So if we just adopt all three of them, I don't have any issues or core issues with them. And I think that would be the easiest way forward. And you can just put that in a box in the recommendations without having to go through each one and take out certain words, things of that nature.
I'll second Randy's motion if that's a motion.
Excuse
Well,
me.
we do have a motion on the floor, if I'm not mistaken, given our rule. So it hasn't been second. And that was the motion that Ellen had made.
I did want to give Terry Gorman an opportunity to speak as well, since she was also one of the ones that made a recommendation. If you have any comments that you wanted to share.
Actually, I do. Thank you, Michelle. And I actually quite like Randy's suggestion, because we're asking the legislature to take this on and to move it forward. And I think by providing all of these recommendations, and I would even suggest that, you know, some editing for redundancy only might lighten this up a little bit. But I do know that when the social equity group presented, there was some discussion within the task force about, well, who's a Native Hawaiian and how would that work, and so forth and so on. And I will remind people that the Office of Hawaiian Affairs is the state's agency to improve the well-being of Native Hawaiians, and either working alone or working in conjunction with the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, working with Native Hawaiian homelands and other Native Hawaiian organizations, would be able to sort those bits out. And they also have the cultural platform from which to work on behalf of Native Hawaiians who opt to participate in a social equity program. So I just wanted to make those points that I think it's very important for OHA and DHHL at a minimum to be involved, and I also support the suggestion that was made in testimony that the Hawaiian Affairs committees from the Senate and from the House of Representatives be involved as well.
Thank you, Terry. I guess I want to return to member Ellen Ching, since she's the one with the open motion.
Hearing from my colleagues, I will withdraw my motion.
Okay. And I apologize for my cold right now. I'm having a hard time talking. Okay, so what I have heard is that at least there are at least four people that are suggesting that the recommendations that are placed into our final report actually include all three suggestions that were implemented. And so I guess I will make a motion that that we the recommendation be that to list all three with the edits that you see on for my recommendation that were suggested by member Ellen Ching. For the record, I'm going to read through the recommendations just to make sure that we have everything properly documented. So the first recommendation will be that the legislature should Legislation should establish a properly resourced, legalized cannabis social equity task force to make recommendations for cannabis justice reform, including the consideration of the level of legalization, resentencing and record clearance, remediation, funding the identification and processing applicable records, removal of law enforcement oversight and civil asset of forfeiture equity, service equity, including consideration of equity in employment, custody, housing, insurance, real estate, banking, professional services, and community reinvestment, equity in the market, including consideration of social equity licensing, state support for social equity license applications, transition period, social equity licensee product sales during the transition, state support for social equity licensee businesses, affirmative action type protections and qualifying for social equity designation, and that the task force shall at a minimum include leaders from the office of I'm sorry, I want to spell it out. It's Office of, can somebody help me out, please? I want to make sure I get this correctly.
It's
Of Hawaiian
Office of
Affairs.
Hawaiian Affairs.
Okay, thank you. Just want to
And
make sure.
Department of Hawaiian Homelands.
Department of Hawaiian. Is Homelands 2 words or one?
One, it's one.
Okay, I
You
got
have
it.
correct.
Alrighty, thank you. And then the second recommendation is from member Garrett Halladyer that the Act 169 dual use of cannabis task force is pleased to provide the Hawaii State Legislature with a menu of policy options to investigate in order to best integrate appropriate social equity policies into any future dual use cannabis program in Hawaii. The history of cannabis enforcement in Hawaii has engendered a diverse set of inequities across racial, economic, and geographic spectrums, as well as the rest of the country is discovering as well, and as the rest of the country is discovering as well. Explicit policies must be put into place to redress these harms. Without integrated social equity policies, the experience of other states, as well as a variety of scholarly research sources have shown that these inequities only increase in emerging cannabis industries. Oh my goodness, what happened here? Okay, the attached, sorry, I'm gonna take off this header so that I can read the language. The attached report from the social equity. Oh my gosh, something is wrong with this. The attached report from the Social Equity Permitted Interaction Group of the Dual Use Task Force surveys the landscape of potential policies, while the Dual Use Task Force as a whole cannot explicitly recommend any of these policies. In particular, the task force does recognize that any set of social equity policies meant to effectively redress the historical harms of cannabis enforcement will need to pull something from each of the 3 buckets of policies outlined in the report: cannabis justice reform, community reinforcement, and equity in the market. It is the opinion of the Act 169 Dual Use of Cannabis Task Force that the integration of social equity policies into a dual use cannabis program deserves intentional study and incorporation by the Hawaii State Legislature into any future cannabis bills. And then the third recommendation from member Terry Gorman, in lieu of approving specific recommendations made by the Social Equities Permitted Interaction Group, the Dual Use Task Force requests legislators convene a new properly resourced working group to research social equity while considering a legal adult use cannabis industry. This working group should use the report submitted by the Social Equity Permitted Interaction Group as a high quality resource document. Social equity as part of a newly legal cannabis program is essential to any future legislation and regulation in Hawaii. Other jurisdictions have included social equity as a vital element of legalizing adult cannabis use programs. While there are differences and similarities among many of these programs, Hawaii's situation is unique because of the effects that cannabis laws have had on Native Hawaiians specifically. For this reason, the legislature's social equity working group should at minimum include leaders from the Office of Hawaiian Affairs as the state's lead agency for improving the well-being of Native Hawaiians. OHA should establish methods for determining Native Hawaiian ancestry to qualify those seeking to participate in a social equity program. OHA should also take the lead on developing a plan for a Native Hawaiian social equity program in collaboration with other Hawaiian serving state agencies and non-governmental organizations. Equally important is the inclusion of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands because many of the lands under their jurisdiction are zoned for agricultural use by Native Hawaiians and could be key to strengthening cultivation and processing of locally grown cannabis. Finally, because one's racial, ethnic, or cultural background does not predict success or failure in any business enterprise, legislators should include other Hawaiian serving organizations to advise on appropriate education and/or professional development programs needed to properly prepare Native Hawaiians who seek to participate in a social equity program. So that's the motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
I believe Director Choi seconded. the
Second.
motion.
Okay.
Second.
Alrighty. I am going to take a roll call vote for this first one, just to make sure that I have a quorum. So if you could just respond with yes or aye. Dory Palkovich,
Yes.
Joanne
Yes.
Uchida Takeuchi.
Yes.
Okay, I vote yes. Isaac Choi,
Yes.
Jarrett Redula, I don't think is on. And I don't think that Barrett Otani was able to join either. They are involved in. Dr. Ireland. Are you still on? Okay, I don't see him. Ellen Ching.
Yes.
Okay, Terry Gorman.
Yes.
Okay. Senator Joyce San Buenaventura.
Yes.
Okay. I don't think that Representative Yamane was able to join. Randy Gons.
Yes.
Okay. Wendy Gibson Viviani.
Yes.
Nikos Leverance.
Aye.
And Garrett Halladire.
Yes.
Okay. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, so we have 11 votes. And adopted. Okay, Judge Broderick.
Yes, thank you. I was first asked to make an announcement, task force members. If any of you need to leave, please announce when you leave so that we can continue to track. Thank you. Now, item 3, let's turn to that agenda item, task force member discussion and decision making on additional recommendations to include in the task force final report to the legislature. I don't believe there's anyone here in person who wishes to testify. Okay, seeing none, we'll move to virtual testimony.
Judge
online?
Broderick, I'm sorry, can I interrupt for a minute? I see that Joanne has her hand raised.
Yes, thank you. I just want to note that I saw the agenda. I submitted comments to the draft report on November 16, and I don't see those recommendations included in the agenda. I just wanted to point out that the comment I had to do with the comment that I made during the prior meeting, which is to try and reconcile the recommendations of the patient protection language with what was actually in the report. I noticed that on page 26 of the report, under patient protections, item 4, the language has been unchanged. It still says legislation should provide patient reimbursement for approved medical cannabis products by state regulated insurers. And the reason that it's of concern to me as a spokesperson for DCCA is that by using words like should provide, it possibly triggers mandated health benefits, which is a whole other can of worms. And so we don't want to use language like that, especially if the actual content of the report says otherwise and uses the word permitted instead of provide. So that's just a comment I wanted to add. I just noticed that it wasn't included in the agenda, so I wanted to bring it to the chair's attention. Thank you.
Madam Chair, may I proceed?
Yes, please do.
All right, thank you. We have a testifier who wishes to testify virtually. And again, to remind our testifiers, this deals with testimony about additional recommendations to include in the task force final report to the legislature. The first virtual testifier is Dr. Clifton Otto. Dr. Otto.
Aloha, Chair, members of the task force. Thank you for taking the time and effort that you have put into this task force. Dr. Clifton Otto here, offering public testimony on agenda item 3, specifically the federal Schedule 1 recommendation by task force member Terry Gorman and the related recommendation by task force member Wendy Gibson Viviani. The medical use working group for this task force documented that about 25% of patients and certifying providers are experiencing negative consequences from federal Schedule 1. Our legislature unanimously expressed its will to resolve this situation with federal Schedule 1 during the 2021 regular session. And the White House recently admitted that federal Schedule 1 is a failed approach to marijuana. Our incoming state administration needs to hear that federal Schedule 1 is an issue that must be addressed, especially if the state is going to move forward with an adult use authorization. I hope that you will vote to add a federal Schedule 1 recommendation to the final task force report. Those are my comments, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Dr. Otto, questions for Dr. Otto, task force members? All right, seeing none, thank you, sir. Will that do it for our virtual testifiers? Do you have any phone testifiers? None. Okay, Madam Chair, we're moving relatively quickly. We're now ready to take up agenda item 3, task force member discussion and decision-making on additional recommendations to include in the task force final report. The legislature, I turn the microphone over to you.
Okay. It's unfortunate that it's the one day that I can't talk very well. Okay, so we are on agenda item 3, which is task force discussion and decision making on additional recommendations. So task force members were invited to submit any additional recommendations other than those that were proposed by the working groups. There were 4 additional recommendations that were submitted for consideration, and I'm going to take each of the 4 recommendations separately for discussion, and then for a vote. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I do have.
Chair?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to take a chance here. Okay. Following the lead of the vote on the previous recommendations, is it possible? I'd like to make a motion that we accept all recommendations as a group, including what Joanne put in her comments, and see if we can pass a recommendation or that we adopt all the elements that's in the agenda. The motion is to include all the recommendations, including what Joanne put in there as a group.
Second,
Okay, we can take the vote. Excuse me, sorry. I am still gonna pull it up just so that everybody can see the language that we are voting on. Okay, so there are 4 additional recommendations, and so this is the motion. The first recommendation was from member Terry Gorman, recommending that the state of Hawaii take direct action to stop federal Schedule I classification of cannabis from being applied to Hawaii's registered medical cannabis patients, certifying medical professionals and state licensees. The second recommendation was from member Garrett Halladyer, recommending that the University of Hawaii John A. Burns School of Medicine should investigate offering medical cannabis education as a part of its curriculum. And then there were recommendations from 2 recommendations from member Wendy Gibson Viviani. The first was regarding the including medical cannabis education requirement as a part of the certifying provider application process. And there are recommendations specifically for what should be required for APRNs as well as MDs and DOs, doctors of osteopathy, which are the types of medical providers that are currently allowed to certify patients for medical use. And then the fourth item was to also make it a priority that to allow Hawaii to act before the federal government imposes its own system of legalization upon the state. So the motion before us is to adopt all 4 together. And again,
Wait, with Joanne's comments.
With Joanne's comments. Okay, I was actually going to ask Joanne if the problem with putting it on separately, sorry, I know I'm scrolling up and down. I hope I'm not making everybody dizzy by doing that. Wait, I'll refer to my 4 paper copies. Okay, so my concern with adding an additional item to vote right on the list right now is that it was not part of the meeting notice. And I don't think that as such, it's something that the task force is allowed to consider for adopting. But Joanne did submit, I'm sorry that that didn't get incorporated. I was gonna ask Joanne if it would be acceptable for her to incorporate the statement that she made, listing it under the recommendations as a reservation in the final task force report.
Actually, I think it's simpler than that. I think that the report erroneously listed the recommendations of the group. And therefore, I think that you, Chair, can exercise your discretion in reconciling the language of the report with what was voted on at the last meeting, because what was voted on at the last meeting was the correct language. So the report is actually reflecting erroneously what the group voted on.
Oh, okay. If that's the case, then we'll address it under agenda item 4 because that's what I wanted to do, is run through the agenda to see if there were any errors in the content,
Thank you.
and we can make the correction there before we take a final vote on the final report. Is that acceptable?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay. Are we good?
Okay, so let me modify my motion to accept all of the suggestions. Agenda item 3 as a group.
Okay,
I can have a second.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
okay. So I will take a vote again. I'm gonna take a roll call vote. Dory Halkovich,
Yes.
Joanne Taki.
Yes, yes.
I have reservations, so I will speak to my reservations following, but I vote yes with reservations. Isaac Choi,
Yes.
Jared, I don't think is on. And I don't think Barrett is on. Dr. Ireland. Not present. Ellen Ching,
Yes.
okay. Terry Gorman,
Yes.
okay. Senator San Buenaventura,
Yes.
okay, I don't think Rep. Yamani is there. Randy Gantz,
Aye.
Wendy Gibson Viviani,
Yes.
Nichols Leverance,
I with reservations, reservations specifically regarding the formation of a working group and resolving state and federal Schedule I conflicts. The solution here is clear. The feds need to deschedule Mahalo.
okay. I'll circle back with you just to, when we're done voting, just so that I can get the proper wording of your reservation for incorporation into the final report. Garrett Halladyer.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yes, 2 with reservations. Okay, so let's see, sorry. Okay, since we have to finalize this report today, Nichols, how would you like me to have your reservation worded?
My reservation is only with respect to the provision calling for a working group to look at solutions to resolving DEA Schedule I and state conflicts. In my view, there is no need for a working group, and that it's incumbent upon the federal government to take cannabis off the list of controlled substances under federal law.
Okay. Okay, I think I got it. Thank you. As to my reservation, that I want to express is my concern was that, we had heard from Mr. Devon Ward that it does remain questionable as to whether this action will achieve what proponents are hoping it will do. So my suggestion is that, and I'll put this into the reservations, is that I would recommend that the state of Hawaii further study rather than in lieu of taking action, because I feel that it's not clear exactly what action should be taken. Okay, I think we are done with agenda item 3.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So let's turn to agenda item 4. Task Force member approval of final draft report to the state legislature. I don't see anyone here in person who wishes to testify on that item. In terms of virtual testifiers, if anyone online would like to submit testimony on agenda item 4, and just on agenda item 4, please raise your hand when I call your name and be asked to unmute. Please go ahead and unmute yourself and feel comfortable. Please turn on your camera. Do you have any virtual testifiers? Okay, no virtual testifiers, but we do have one by phone. Robert, let's see if we can get you going again. Hey, Robert, I've been told that. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Robert.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
For that federal law with the Schedule 1 conflict, there is something the state can do that hopefully can be included with this task force recommendation. The federal law that just passed, the medical marijuana research, medical marijuana and cannabidiol research expansion act, that allows institutions other than Ole Miss to study THC types of cannabis. And you can go on the FDA.gov website. There's a 7-step process that can be completed to do federal research. There's at least 10 organizations outside of Ole Miss, including private entities. As a disabled farmer myself, I could probably do this, but just having the UH School of Medicine work with the UH CTAR to make a method for this at least disabled or equity patients to farm for research purposes. So that could be worked out, and hopefully that can be included with the recommendations from the task force to help get that process started. Mahalo.
Thank you, Robert. Task force members, any questions for Robert? All right, seeing none, Madam Chair, we're now ready to take up agenda item 4, task force member approval of the final draft report of the state legislature. Madam Chair, before I turn the microphone and the meeting over to you for the last time, I want to exercise just a minute of personal privilege, if I might. Madam Chair, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to work on such an important issue and for showing great leadership throughout the entire process. Task force members, I want to recognize the tremendous commitment you made to this effort. I'm humbled by your expertise and how serious you took your responsibility as a task force member. It's been my privilege to work with you on this matter. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Judge Broderick. Your assistance and support has been greatly appreciated as well. Could not have done this without your assistance. So really,
You're here. Yeah.
Okay. So approaching the end. Sorry, getting myself organized here. So I am going to pull up the final draft report. I think just to see if there are other clarifications, and just so that I can make the appropriate fixes that were recommended by Joanne. And if there's other areas that need correction. Okay, so I believe you said that it was at the bottom of page 26.
It's in the highlighted area.
Okay.
Item 4.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Item 4.
I think it's on the next
Is this the correct pay item?
No, it's on the next page.
Okay,
There you go, item 4.
okay,
It should say, it says legislation should provide patient reimbursement. It should say legislation should permit instead of provide patient
Okay.
reimbursement. So simple change of that one word. So it's no longer mandated.
okay.
Rather change is purely stylistic, and so you can, I disregard that. I withdraw that one.
Okay, so legislation should permit patient reimbursement for approved medical cannabis products by state regulated insurers.
Yes.
Okay. Let me see if I can at least highlight that, just so that I know that that was a change. Okay. Task force members, does anybody else have any errors that they were able to identify in the report that needs to be addressed now before we take a vote? Okay, hearing none. I am moving that we vote on approval of this final report, noting that there will be additions that we just voted in. So the social equity recommendations will reflect the language that I read through earlier today to include all 3 suggestions that suggested language that have been put forward. And that the additional recommendations, all 4 of the recommendations that were listed in the agenda will be included verbatim as recommendations, additional recommendations under the last section of the final report, with the 2 with reservations. The first being that my suggestion is that the recommendation is that this state of Hawaii study further and not take action on the recommended action, because it's unclear that it will achieve what's anticipated. And then the reservation from member Nikos Leverance that for that a working group is not necessary because it is incumbent upon the federal government to deschedule cannabis.
Second.
Okay, I have a second. And I will again take a roll call. Dory Palkovich.
Yes.
Okay. Joanne Takeuchi.
Yes.
Okay. I vote yes. Isaac Choi.
Yes.
Okay. Jarrett is not here still. Barrett is not here still, and Dr. Ireland is not here. Ellen Ching.
Yes.
Okay. Terry Gorman.
Yes.
Okay. Senator Joyce Buenaventura.
Yes.
Okay. There's no rep Yamane. Randy Gons.
I vote aye.
Okay. Wendy Gibson Viviani.
Yes.
Okay. Nikos Leverance.
Aye.
Thank you. And Garrett Halladyer.
Yes.
Okay. All righty.
I do have a question.
Sure.
This is Wendy.
Yes.
So what happens with all of the social equity recommendations that we're not adopting, are they just going to be at the bottom of the report as resource material?
Well, all of the task force, the working group reports are all part, they're attachments to the final report. So that information,
okay.
yeah. So all of
Okay.
the working, yeah, none of that work is lost.
Okay,
They are all definitely going to be attached to the final report.
okay.
Okay.
But it'll be clear that we did not approve these recommendations, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so the recommendations that the task force members voted to adopt, those are the ones that are highlighted in the box, just to make sure that it's clear that those were the ones that we were in agreement on. And then, but all of the other recommendations from the working groups will be available for reference in the working group reports.
Okay, great. Just wanted
Okay.
to make sure.
Sure, no problem. Before we close, I do want to just give task force members each an opportunity to voice any comments or concerns or opinions. I mean, these will not be included in the final task force report, but you know, this meeting is recorded and the recording will be maintained and be made available. So if you would like to make any comments, I would invite you to please do so at this time. No?
Thank you, Chair Nakata. Thank you, Judge, both for your leadership and for facilitating a very robust conversation over the course of the past year. Through it all, you know, through the pandemic and through technological challenges. I wish we had the occasion to meet in person more frequently. And I think mahalo also to our fellow commissioners, particularly those from the community and from the government sector as well. I think it's very important going forward with whatever future task forces or working groups that may or may not convene, that the voice of impacted communities must be centered. And in this case, you know, people who have been, you know, criminalized through 8 decades of cannabis prohibition in this state, and even before it was a state. And that we should always make every effort to include people from impacted and under-resourced communities in the discussion. So mahalo everybody, and well, I'm sure we'll be seeing each other in some context in the near future. So thank you all.
Thank you, Nikos. Wendy, I see your hand raised.
I just wanted to echo a lot of what Nikos just said. Thank you so much for all your hard work, all of you, and bringing so much to the table. And I would like to also thank all the people who provided public testimony. I read every piece of it, and you know, and take it all to heart. But thank you so much for, I just, you know, it's really apparent that a lot of hard work went into all of these reports. And thank you, Judge Broderick, for helping me moderate all of this. And the IT people, because they had a lot of especially hard challenges, and Michelle also. So thank you very much, everybody, for, yes, nice to be a part of this. I think we produced a really good report.
Thank you, Wendy. Terry, I saw your hand pop up.
I always have a hard time unmuting myself. I think maybe it's because I'm Portuguese. I too want to thank everybody, Michelle, all the members of the task force. I especially want to thank the members of the PIG group for medical use, especially Dr. Lynn Lee and Tammy at the registry. It was a tremendous honor to work with people with such high levels of professionalism. And I just felt like, we did the best we could given the amount of time we have. But before I sign off and wish everybody happy holidays, I would like to point out some written legislation that came from Representative Gene Ward for this meeting. And I tend to agree with him. He calls it the elephant in the room, and the black market is the wild card. I don't think any state has figured out the illicit cannabis market problem well yet. And I do have reservations about that and its impact on particularly medical cannabis patients. Like others on our group, I've seen a lot of miraculous recovery due to the medical use of cannabis, some of it within my own family. I had an 80-something-year-old aunt whose life literally was lengthened by about 5 years as a result of using medical cannabis in conjunction with her cancer diagnosis. So it's a personal issue for me. And so I really want to thank everybody for supporting the recommendations of the medical use group. And, it was wonderful having somebody like Wendy, who's a trained cannabis nurse, to help us along the way. So thanks to you, Michelle, to everybody at the Department of Health, to Judge Broderick, everybody who made this thing happen. And I'm going to just put it out there and say it. This has turned into a part-time job for me, and I'm happy to be done with it today. So thank you very much. Aloha.
Thanks, Terry and Randy. I see your hand up.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo everyone's mahalos. I've been in this space for a while and I do this every day. And for those who were asked to serve on this task force and did so with an open heart and open mind and really dug into the details, noting that, this may not be your area of expertise, I really appreciate you taking the time to be here and be curious and want to know and show your expertise and offer it. And it really made a huge impact on all of us. And I learned a ton from everyone. And this was, as we stated in the beginning, pretty historic for our state, really convening opportunity to research these issues. So again, thank you so much. This will do wonderful things for our state in the future.
Thank you. Thanks, Randy. Yes, and so I guess I get to have the last word and thank everybody. I was just amazed and very, very appreciative of everybody's hard work. I was pretty nervous about being dumped into this role. I assumed the responsibility for the overall program in April of this year, and then that was my very first assignment was, okay, now you've got to convene this task force. And so it was a bit of a whirlwind for me, and I could not have done it with all of you that are here, and those of the task force members that could not make it today. I do also want to give a huge amount of thanks to the staff at the Office of Medical Cannabis Control and Regulation, who, as you know, learned how to be Zoom experts the hard way. But I think they did a pretty good job, and now maybe we can offer that as a side benefit of our program. But with that, thanks, Judge Broderick, and I would like to say that the task force is officially closed, and happy holidays to everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Mahalo, everybody.
Take care, Michelle.
Thank you.
Yeah, get well. Yeah.
We'll be sending you some NyQuil.
Now that I can sleep, right?
Now's your chance.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Aloha. We hope.
Take good care. See you guys.